Most athletes are guessing when it comes to their performance and their recovery. Nowadays, you guys are tracking your velocity, your PRs. You've got all these different measurements in terms of your training, how hard you're throwing, how hard you're hitting. But how do you know that you're actually maximizing your recovery? How do you know you're becoming a better athlete, even if the number on the scale isn't changing? Blood work, hydration tests, omega 3 levels, body comp. These are small details that can really separate average athletes from elite ones. It also helps you identify, hey, what are the things that I'm missing? What are the things that could be improving, even if I can't physically see it on the scale? I can't physically see it in my training. So today I'm joined by Jena Brown. She's a sports dietitian specializing in endurance athletes to break down what tests athletes should be getting, why they matter, and really how to maximize your performance from the inside out. So, Jena, thanks for joining us today.
I am happy to be here.
So let's just start off with big picture wise. What are some of those lab tests? What are some of those tests that the athletes really should be focusing on?
Yeah, so obviously we want to have just our normal baseline a metabolic panel and our lipid panel drawn each year, ideally, at least once a year. But often what's not included in those panels are going to be your vitamin D, also your omega 3 index, and also advanced iron panels such as ferritin. So those I recommend adding to your annual blood work and then also testing more than once a year. So going back every 6 months, sometimes even more.
Okay. So I want to start off with just the general panels, the metabolic panels, because I feel like that's something that I never got done when I was a kid. So, and I have a feeling a lot of the athletes out there have not gotten those done. So, why would that be important for the average athlete?
Yeah. So, you want to track just your basic health, such as, for example, your lipid, like your cholesterol, your triglycerides, your HDL and LDL. Those are going to be indications of your health, and health is the foundation of your performance. Also, we just want to make sure everything is in check to support, like I said, overall health, so that you can lay the foundation. As kids, you can request those lab panels, but obviously that's going to be up to your parents. I actually didn't know that for my own children. And so now, whenever we have our annual well check, I request those labs to be drawn. But, the kids don't like that to be done. Older student athletes, like in college, that's something that you're going to probably have to actively or proactively ask your provider because a lot of times they aren't really, promoting that early on. I'm not quite sure why.
Mhm. Okay. And then what about you mentioned specifically the omega threes? I know that was a big one. Let's break that one down of why is that important for athletes?
So the omega 3 index specifically, now this one actually you can't have drawn through your doctor, at least right now. Most doctors don't offer it. So this would be something that you would test through an independent lab, such as Omega Quant. There are also some more functional medicine inclined labs or specialty labs that you can have. But the omega 3 index is measuring the levels of your DHA and EPA in your red blood cell membrane. And essentially, you need a healthy cell membrane so that you can allow things in and keep things out that shouldn't be coming in and going out. So, this is going to affect, again, just your overall metabolic health, your cellular adaptations and cellular health, and then ultimately your health and your performance.
Okay. What about when it comes to like omega 3s and recovery? Because this is one that I'm definitely big on omega 3s with athletes. What makes it unique to, the athlete who wants to perform better or recover better? Or I'm curious if you have any inputs on the brain piece of it too.
Oh, yes, for sure. For muscle recovery and for brain health, especially if you're in a sport where you're at a high risk of, brain injury, so concussion and TBI. But for muscle health, it's going to be more, or and brain health. They're both related to inflammation. So the biggest piece is, we want to reduce inflammation. Now, we don't want to completely avoid inflammation. We do need inflammation for adaptations, and the level of inflammation that we need is going to depend maybe on what kind of season we're in. But yes, essentially, most of us have probably more inflammation than we need if we don't have everything in check, such as our nutrition and our hydration and our diet. So that would be the biggest piece to including omega, whether it's through foods or a high quality supplement, which we can talk about that as well, just to reduce and calm down inflammation so that you can recover and reduce muscle soreness so you can go into your next training session and work harder and make more adaptations. Now, related to brain health and concussion, our brain is primarily made up of fat, specifically DHA. And most of us do not have enough levels of DHA and EPA in our bodies and in our brain. There are studies that show that if you optimize those levels before you have a brain injury, it can perhaps prevent as much, like it would prevent as much, how to reduce the brain injury during an episode. So you may still have the concussion, right? Because we're actually having that trauma, but the effect is going to be less than what you would experience had you had, optimized omega-3 levels.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's unique too, because even afterwards, there's some of those studies that they've had of like treating concussions, and because we do know that the omega threes in the brain, they do go down after a concussion, and so it's like, okay, like we could even potentially treat this, but it's the hard thing, for football, baseball, all those that suffer with the concussions, the chances of your parent being like, "Oh, hey, we're going to let you do a study," or they're going to study you and you're going to do the, it's very slim. And so that's where it's like, there's evidence pointing in that direction, but we don't have enough to be like, all right, this is the protocol. This is the thing. I mean, there is a protocol out there, but I think it needs more research to be like, all right, this is it.
I agree. So there's a really good book that I read, and of course, at this point, science is always changing. But if you want a good read and it's an easy read, like whether you're an athlete or a professional, I felt like it was well written. But When Brains Collide, and the protocol in that book immediately after a concussion, I believe, was 9 grams of EPA and DHA for a week. Then it was 6, and then 3. And I hesitate a little bit, not because I think it's harmful, but it's not a solid protocol that we can apply generally across the population. So sometimes I'll look at the individual athlete and I will, obviously look at their symptoms, their post concussion symptoms. And then if I know their diet and their lifestyle, and I'm thinking, okay, we know that they're not following, they probably don't have high levels of omega-3 and DHA in their body. It's likely that they could benefit. And so you just kind of have to navigate that with the individual athlete. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
and and I think that's, you think about like, again, the athlete who doesn't eat fish whatsoever, then it's like, yeah, there's a good chance you probably don't have enough. So you mentioned the supplementation piece of it. I think that's important to break down. One of my clients even just asked about this. So what's your recommendations around getting enough omega 3s and like food versus supplements?
I mean, we're dietitians. We love food. I'm all about getting your omega-3s from food. My take is that you have to be very committed to eating the specific types of foods, which you're going to get the most amount of omega-3s from those fatty fish. That's expensive too, but the omega-3 supplements are expensive, and we have to consider that as well. But I have found it to be most successful by taking a high quality omega-3 supplement. Now, I usually tell people, if you're not willing to buy the high quality pure supplement, don't take them at all. So I'd rather them not go to the grocery store and buy, because usually if I tell them a specific product, even if it's available at the store, we're going to see the product right next to it that's less expensive, and it's not going to be third party tested. We don't know the amount of omega 3 or DHA and EPA in that specific product. So that's generally my quick go-to, is we take the high quality or we don't take them at all. The problem with that is that, maybe there's a chance that we can make a small difference, but it may not be a significant impact on our omega-3 level if they were to buy something other than what I recommended. So there's pros and cons to both ways. Ideally, we're eating a diet rich in omega-3s, and then we're also probably taking a high quality supplement because most of us aren't realistically practically going to eat enough of those fatty fish, every single week. But I
Yeah.
don't know, do you have a different take on that in your
No, I
experience?
mean, yeah, that's where I kind of lean towards as well. I like that you say like just don't take them at all too, because I mean, again, the quality. It's not just about, oh hey, this has this much omega 3s. It's also about like, the rancidity of it, or some of those things that are concerns. How can you know, I guess, that, even on the rancid part of it, like how can you know like that omega 3 supplement is quality?
Yes. So a lot of times people will say, but they make me burp. And I will say, if they're making you burp and it tastes gross, most likely they are rancid. When you buy a product that one isn't pure and then two hasn't been stored properly, heat, light, and air all cause oxidation and damage, rancidity to the product. So if the supplement that you are buying on the shelf has been sitting in the heat during in this warehouse wherever it's stored, then maybe sitting out in the truck before it's delivered into the store. I don't know what kind of conditions it's being exposed to, and that's not even considering how they're being made. So all those things matter, which is my preference is that they order it through a professional grade dispensary. That's the ideal way that they obtain these, where this dispensary has, tested or validated storage conditions and then shipping policies. But that's kind of how I navigate that. And in terms of the amount in the product, if you flip the bottle over, or if you don't even do that, the front of the bottle will usually say it has so much omega-3s in it, but you need to know specifically the DHA and EPA. So you flip it over, look at the line items of DHA and EPA, and you add those numbers together, and that's how we determine how much is in each soft gel or liquid, whatever form you're taking. And then we need to figure out, I usually aim for at least 3 grams or 3,000 milligrams of DHA and EPA per day. And some of those, it could take quite a few of those capsules, those soft gels, depending on, how concentrated they are. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Any So I like that you highlight even just like how things are stored. I think that's important to think about, because I immediately thought of Amazon. And then I'm like, so would you lean more towards buying straight from the manufacturer, like the person or the business that created it essentially?
Yes, for
Yeah.
sure. I prefer like go straight to the source. Also, so not Amazon. Maybe I prefer no supplements from Amazon, but there's some that I think are more shelf stable. Omega-3s are not going to be one of them.
Yeah.
And then the grocery store, what I'll do is I'll say this specific brand, and you're going to have a better better odds that it's going to be a better product. But yes, otherwise, I prefer you to go straight to the manufacturer. And then also, I don't know if you have a dispensary that you use. I use Full Script, and I know a lot
Mhm.
of other dietitians do as well. And they definitely, make sure that their storage and then also their shipping conditions. So they'll put a little ice pack in there if it's heat sensitive.
Any brands that you tend to like, they just naturally start, coming out more often, or?
Yeah, my favorite is Nordic Naturals because they're concentrated. You can get the high concentrated soft gels where you take fewer. And so if you order it from the manufacturer, it's called Pro Omega. And then if you get it from the grocery store, it's called Ultimate Omega. But there are other brands. I know I was getting a Carlson Labs option product for my son, or my children, I should say, because they were the most concentrated I could find in a smaller size. So you also have to consider the soft gel size. Like if you can't swallow large soft gels, maybe we are looking at a different, or, have to consider different delivery, I guess you can say. But yeah, I do. And Nordic Naturals also has an NSF certified for sport option. So I like that as well if you are a drug tested athlete.
No, I mean, yeah, and I mean, I feel like it's better in general to at least have the NS. I mean, USP is okay. It's a good start, but I think it's, if you're trying to play college or you're just trying to have that quality, just go for the NSF.
I agree. I mean, if I'm working with a drug tested athlete, I'm definitely, because I'm like, I don't want it on my, if I
Yes.
recommend a supplement. So I look for NSF certified for sport, but also try to find like a clean product. So I usually, try to emphasize that NSF doesn't mean it's clean. It means it's tested and that the label's accurate. There aren't, steroids in it, but it doesn't mean there aren't other additives in there that maybe we'd prefer to avoid. So, which I don't usually see in omega-3s, but in
Yeah.
general.
Oh yeah, and I think that's important for a lot of my athletes. This is why I tend to lean more towards Momentous or Thorn, because like Momentous, like 31 of 32 NFL teams are using it. Like most of the colleges I've seen are using it, so it's like it's a good standard. They sent out an email when they were like, hey, so this supplement actually lacks research, so we're taking it off our like we're not even going to sell it anymore. And I'm like, that's what you want in a supplement company.
Yes, absolutely. Because in general, I'll just start off and say supplements are not for your health or your performance, they're for money. And then if you know how to use them and how to select them, then yes, they can definitely support your health and performance. But otherwise, I think a lot of times the primary motivation is to make money, which everybody wants to make money, but we need to know how to use them.
So another test you mentioned is vitamin D, and this is one that you're in Texas, you have the benefit of having the sun more often, but I think it's still valid to talk about that compared to us in Seattle and Pacific Northwest, where it's overcast right now, and it's probably going to be overcast for the next few weeks at least.
Yeah, regardless of where you live, we need to have our vitamin D tested. It's not typically included in our annual blood work. If you do actually go to the doctor and they do offer blood work, it's an easy fix. You can just request them to draw it. But I recommend that everybody tests it at least twice a year, so every 6 months. Now, 3 to 4 times a year, that would be super great, but maybe not the most realistic, going to happen. So even in Texas, I mean, I always say, I don't know about you, but I usually wear clothes outside.
Long
So,
sleeves.
I mean, I know it's hot in the summer, but we're still generally clothed and most of us don't live out by the pool in our swimsuits. So, you do have to have skin exposure to, get the vitamin D. And on top of that, we're conditioned to wear sunscreen. So you also need to have, you don't need to have sunscreen on to absorb that vitamin D. So just those kind of considerations there, regardless of where you live, you need to have your vitamin D tested. That's my
Yeah, and I
take.
think yeah, no, I like that. And it doesn't mean you may need supplementation. It means at
Right.
least check it. And I think that's the key for sure.
Yes. Please check it because you don't feel a vitamin D deficiency. And if you do have those symptoms or have symptoms or suspect, maybe I should say that, if you suspect that you're vitamin D deficient, there's also so many other reasons, contributing factors that, maybe it is vitamin D, maybe it's under fueling, maybe, there's all kinds of different things that could lead to, possible vitamin D, like if you're suspecting that.
Yeah. So on that note, then what are some of those things? Because I mean, vitamin D is different than omega threes, where there are some things we can kind of notice. Again, like you said, they're probably factored into multiple things. But what would you say are some of the things for vitamin D that to kind of look for, like, hey, these might be signs that you're not getting enough?
Well, I think the biggest one is just simply feeling like tired and fatigued. Obviously, we could write that off as so many other things. And, we don't want to jump to conclusions either, right? So if somebody came to me, if an athlete came to me and said, I'm feeling tired, I wouldn't automatically assume it's vitamin D deficiency. I'm going to say,
Yeah.
well, let's look at your hydration. Let's look at your fueling. Now, a big one is going to be a stress fracture or a bone injury. Now that one tends to get our attention and kind of, the light bulb turns on and says, hey, maybe we should be looking at some other things. But so that one's easier if you are familiar with what is required for bone health. So if we don't know that calcium and strength training and vitamin D and vitamin K, all of these things are important for bone health, then maybe not so much. But it does tend to get our attention, more readily if we do have a bone injury because now we can't compete in our sports is kind of a big
Yeah.
deal. But yeah, I think fatigue is one of the biggest ones. Sometimes you'll kind of have, muscle aches, you'll have poor recovery. But again, I think the assumption is that it's so many other things before we consider vitamin D. So that one's a tough one.
Yeah, for sure. One, I think it's important to note too, like vitamin D does so many things in the body. Like, yes, the bones are one of those first things we think about, but yeah, I mean, there's those other roles. So why should the athlete and the parent of the athlete care about vitamin D at all?
Yeah, well, the first one, I think, because it is the more noticeable one, the first thing that comes to mind is bone health. So, we want to have strong bones so that we can participate in sports and be physically active, whether we're athletes or just active people. So, that's the biggest one, in my opinion. Otherwise, it's important for hormone regulation. It's important for, enzymes and just immunity. So we need it for a lot of different things. We can't play if our bones are injured. We can't play if we're sick, or just like I said, be physically active. So there's a lot of considerations.
So then what about when it comes to if it comes to needing supplementation, what would be your recommendations there? And I know, like, if you're getting it done through the doctor, typically they'll be like, all right, you're going to take this much for this long, and then we're going to, but curious your take on it.
So, what I have found actually is that well, let me back up. The clinical reference range for vitamin D, if you have it drawn by your doctor, is currently 30. We know as sports dietitians, we want our levels at least 45 to 55 minimum. There are some that are kind of saying a ceiling of 75 to 100. I'm not quite there yet, and I don't know what your protocol is. So I typically hang out, I say 45 minimum, 55 to 75 is my preference currently, is where I like to see people's levels. And so that's kind of the first thing, is that a lot of times you're going to kind of get the green light from your doctor. Your levels are fine, and it may be something like 35. We need to have levels higher than that. The second thing would be if the doctor expresses concern, and this isn't anything against doctors. This is just more of like, we're not looking for disease. We're looking for performance, of course, yes, but also just health, because we see a reduced occurrence of stress fractures whenever our levels are at least a 45 level of 45. Again, 55 is going to be even better, but even if we're looking at it from that perspective. So this isn't a knock on the doctor at all. So the second piece to that is that they often don't guide on vitamin D like dosing. So I don't they will say something like you should take vitamin D, but there are so many different kinds of vitamin Ds, and then you go to the grocery store or the pharmacy or maybe even like a supplement store, different levels of vitamin D, and are they third party tested? I think that this is one of those less expensive where, you mentioned USP. I will say, okay, if that's the quickest way you can get it, go to the store and find one that has USP verified, just to make sure that you're actually buying vitamin D. I will use a vitamin D calculator, and so it's based on their body weight and their current level and then your target level. So that's how I determine the target vitamin D dosing. Now, depending on how low it is and how quickly we want a response, I may overshoot that for a short amount of time and then back down to a more, you know, normal dose. And my preference is vitamin D3 with vitamin K2. That you're not going to find at the grocery store. It would typically be through a professional grade dispensary.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I don't know if you use a different protocol for vitamin D with your athletes, since you work with student athletes as your primary, population.
Yeah, I mean, in my position, it's sometimes it's just a matter of getting them on something, ideally, and so that's where I'm like, Kirkland's USP tested, the 2000's okay. Don't take 10,000 a day. Like, don't just blindly do that, because I've seen people hospitalized for that. So it's like, if you're deficient, they're probably going to have you do something like that for a short amount of time. But yeah, but it's like I think for me, a lot of them, it's just a matter of getting them on something, because their brains and everything's going a million miles a minute, especially if there's multiple athletes in one family. But trying to get them more and more, and that's where you look at, like, I think that goes back to the athlete of like, how serious are you about your performance and your health? Like, if you want to take the bare minimum, same thing with the hydration, the electrolytes. If you want to take the bare minimum, take Gatorade or Powerade. If you want to be a little bit, you want to take the next step up, let's go for a better brand. Let's go for,
Yeah.
So I think, yeah.
That's a really great point because, we're all creatures of habit. And so I think it depends on your touch point with that athlete. How often do you see that athlete? Do you have multiple athletes in your household? So if you go and get a bottle from Kirkland or a Kirkland, like those are large quantities generally. So if it was a high dose and they muscle memory, figuratively, we're going to take this every single day. If it was a 10,000 IU or something like that, yeah, that could be not good. Whereas the way I'm working with athletes most of the time is, one-on-one consultation. A lot of times adults, but I definitely see the youth and the student athletes at all different levels. So a nice way to be able to compartmentalize that sometimes is saying, here is a bottle of 30 or 60 capsules. Take 10 high dose, whatever that may be, through this bottle. Then we switch to the next one. But those are going to be smaller bottles versus the really big ones where then they're thinking, well, I don't want to like throw them away,
Yeah,
So
exactly.
all those different considerations.
For sure. So I want to make sure we touch on at least some of these other key labs or key things. And so you mentioned ferritin earlier, and you mentioned, I believe that's one you said that we can get that tested by a doctor. What makes ferritin more important than the other iron labs that we get checked?
Yeah, so it's a great addition that's usually inexpensive that you can ask your doctor to add on to your regular metabolic panel, but it's going to give us some insight into your iron stores. Whereas, like I said, it's not normally drawn. And the thing is if you have really high iron or ferritin levels, well, if they're high, they're indicating inflammation or hemochromatosis, which isn't, all the time, but it definitely occurs. I have seen athletes who take iron supplements because, especially in runners and across country, I actually see it a lot with high school athletes. Their coach tells them to take iron because runners are low in iron. Also, females specifically, right? Where we have blood loss. And so that will reduce our iron stores and our iron levels. But I never recommend taking iron without knowing our level. And that's going to be more than just your regular metabolic panel. So having the ferritin added on will give you an indication of your iron stores. And it can also help us if you're working with an experienced practitioner to say, okay, we're moving in the direction of, like, we want to find it before there's a problem, right? So that we can be proactive instead of reactive. So yeah.
Yeah, and so you touch on the some of the athletes that it's like, which athletes do you feel like are going to be most, this is going to be really important for?
Definitely our endurance athletes, our runners, our cross country athletes, and then females. If they have heavy menstrual cycles, we want to be taking or keeping tabs on our iron stores and our iron levels. Female athletes with heavy menstrual cycles who are endurance athletes, we want to be keeping tabs on those. And then I mean, any athlete can benefit truly from having their iron tested on a regular basis, even if it's, again, that would probably be at least every 6 months, but once a year, just to kind of keep tabs on that.
Awesome. Any last things, I think, around labs, testing, anything that you feel like would be really important for the athletes and the parents, whether it be things we talked about or things we missed?
I think maybe the biggest one would be, some of these tests that we mentioned, ferritin and low iron, you're going to feel that. You're going to feel extremely fatigued. Whereas omega-3 deficiency and vitamin D deficiency, one, you're not going to necessarily feel that. And then the other thing too is whenever we intervene and maybe with supplement or foods, it's not a magic answer. So just it's harder to sell because, everybody wants that immediate feedback, positive feedback. Wow, I took this and I feel amazing. Knowing that you don't always feel significantly different the next day. So we're looking at long-term lab values, and it takes a while to refill those if they are deficient. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important too, like a lot of the athletes who listen to this type of stuff, like they're very serious about their sport, about maximizing their potential. And so for those athletes who, you want to do everything you can to get to that next level, play at the highest level that you're capable of, like these are those needle movers. These are those things that you can really
Mhm.
tune in on. Nutrition in general, which I think is more of a needle, like it's much bigger needle mover than most people realize. But even some of these fine tuning things around like what we're talking about today, I think is huge.
Yes, it definitely sets the athlete apart. It's, one thing that somebody else is not doing that you can do, and it's usually an easy fix, especially if we're being proactive about it and not having to, fix large gaps. Yeah,
Yeah.
it can be a game changer for sure.
Yeah. Don't be like the rest of America where they treat like they treat it like after the fact versus preventing it altogether. Because
Yeah.
obviously things like fractures, you get a fracture and that's already setting you way back. So
Yes.
awesome. Well, Jenna, I really appreciate you hopping on. I know there's a lot of other things we want to unpack around, I mean, body composition, hydration, and stuff like that. We'll definitely have to get together again and tackle those a little bit more. But again, yeah, thanks so much for hopping on.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's great.
Yeah. And what would be the best way for listeners to find you, to connect with you?
Yeah. So my website is victorum.com. So my business is Victorum Performance Nutrition. And then you can find me on social media, Facebook and Instagram at Victorum Nutrition. Those are the easiest ways to connect.
Awesome. And those are in the show notes or the caption. So athletes, you guys can check it out down there. But yeah, if you guys are really serious about separating yourselves, then really focus on some of these needle movers. If you have questions about the supplements, the testing, all those things, then connect with either Jenna or I, and we can dig deeper with you on that. And until next time, keep striving for greatness.